Well, it's awesome having all of you with us today. My name is Chris, and we're in this series titled Love First, looking beyond ourselves. And there's something we all do, whether you're really conscious of it or not, whether you enjoy it or not, there's just something within us that we enjoy having discussions about, and whatever that might be, whatever you like to watch, like to consume, like to do, whatever that is, we like to have these conversations about, what's number one? We just enjoy. And what's interesting about this hierarchical list, that it really doesn't matter about what's number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on down the line. It truly is a discussion about what's number one. If you like sports, right? There's people get paid a ton of money on the TV and radio about who's the GOAT, the greatest of all time, right? Football, who's the greatest quarterback of all time? Who's the greatest receiver of all time? Baseball, who's the greatest hitter, the greatest pitcher of all time? Golf, who's the greatest golfer of all time? I mean, across all sports, we have these conversations like, who's the greatest team of all time? Football, who's the greatest team? Dallas Cowboys of all time. I'm just trying it's okay. We can discuss who's number 2. I mean, some of you are fans of that team. I'm not going to say it. Right? But we enjoy having these conversations, right? And there's some analytics that get applied to number 1, and there's just some subjective what you like that gets applied to number 1. But it's not just sports. I mean, movies. The Avengers movie just came out, the last one, and there's this whole discussion. What was the best Avengers movie of all time, right? Which is the best? If you're a Star Wars fan, right? Out of all the Star Wars movies, what was the number 1 Star Wars movie of all times? For me, I would put The Empire Strikes Back as number 1. I loved Empire Strikes Back. When it comes to bands. What's the number 1 band of all time? Maybe by category, maybe you're a classic rock fan. What was the number 1 classic rock band? Or maybe you're a fan of the 80s hair metal. Yeah. What's the number 1 80s hair metal or grunge metal? Whatever style of music, right? There's this discussion. When it comes to food, right? Maybe it's what's the number 1 fast food restaurant? Maybe we dial that in. What's the number 1 fast food hamburger of all time? And you could go to McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King. By the way, and I can't prove this, but Burger King, have you noticed every time you drive by a Burger King, you just want a hamburger? I don't think they're actually flame grilling their hamburgers. I just think they're pumping that smell like in the air, right? It could be like 6 a.m. and you're like, hamburger. But what's the number 1 fast food hamburger of all time? There's this, it's more East Coast. Have you ever eaten a Five Guys hamburger? Five Guys fan? Really good, really good. You can't argue with Five Guys. Plus, they have free peanuts, and they're hand-cut French fries. So good. If you've ever been to New York City or some other major cities, there's a place called Shake Shack. Any Shake Shack fans? 2. There we go. Shake Shack's amazing, amazing. If you're ever in New York City, there's one in Miami. There's one, I think, in Las Vegas now. Shake Shack's really good. But there's one more that I would put in the number 1 spot. So if you've ever been on the West Coast and if you've ever eaten here, I want to hear you scream online, scream by yourself, or if you're with your kids, don't scare them, but like shout out. If you've ever eaten here, you'll know it goes in the number 1 spot. West Coast. In-N-Out. In-N-Out fans? Yeah, a few of you, In-N-Out. I mean, In-N-Out. Again, Five Guys is good. Shake Shack is good. But right now, I just have this hankering. I'm not even sure where that word came from, right? I have this hankering, right, for In-N-Out, right? And so we just do this. We just make our hierarchical list, and we enjoy having conversations, what is number 1? But again, this is important. The conversation isn't about what's number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and on down. It's only about what's number 1, because there's only one number 1 spot. Only one number 1 spot. That's what the conversation is always about. And here's what happens. We apply this in our spiritual journey, our faith journey as well. we start having these thoughts, these conversations, usually more privately than publicly, but this is still publicly. And we start to apply this type of hierarchy list in our lives. For instance, and I don't think I'm the only person. I'm not saying everyone has had this thought, but I don't think I'm the only one. We start applying this, for instance, like to sin. What's the number one sin? What's the sin up here that really ticks God off? And if you're like me, you're like, I don't want to do that sin. And maybe you even expand that to the top 5. Okay, what are the top 5 sins that really tick God off? I want to avoid the top 5. Number 6 and down, it might be okay. I mean, I'm not saying sin's okay. I'm just saying I want to avoid the number 1 sin. In the Bible, right, it talks about all sin's sin. There's no hierarchical list. It's just sin. But there's something within our brain that we're like, yeah, but, if God does have a list, I want to avoid the top 5. And we just kind of do that. Again, I'm not saying it's biblical. I'm not saying it's right. But we start doing that in our faith journey. We start making our lists. And what's interesting is Jesus understands that, he understands that we make our list. And what Jesus does some 2,000 years ago, he just completely implodes this thinking. Completely shatters it and dismisses it. And gives us no wiggle room when it comes to making our lists, when it comes to our spiritual journey. And so what we're going to see in this interaction today, Jesus is going to be having this conversation with 2 groups of religious leaders, Jewish religious leaders. They were called the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And what's interesting between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were both as groups of people vying for the number 1 spot themselves. The Pharisees and Sadducees both wanted to be the top dog. They wanted the most amount of influence over the Jewish people. They wanted the most power over the Jewish people. They wanted the most leadership voice over the Jewish people. And so the Pharisees hated the Sadducees, and the Sadducees hated the Pharisees. Why? Because they were vying for this number 1 spot. But the one thing that united the Pharisees and Sadducees was their fear of Jesus, because Jesus' popularity was growing, and Jesus' influence was growing, and Jesus' leadership was growing. And so that brought the Pharisees and Sadducees together, because they didn't want Jesus to take the number 1 spot. And so one day, the Pharisees and Sadducees actually came together to try to trap Jesus, to try to trick Jesus, they wanted to dismiss Jesus or ruin his influence, try to undermine his leadership, throw him in jail. I mean, they really didn't care. They just wanted to get rid of Jesus, and then they could go back at, hating each other to try to get to the number 1 spot. So the Sadducees were up first, and they tried to trap Jesus, trick Jesus with this line of questioning, and Jesus was just too good for them. And, Matthew, who was one of the 12, the Bible calls them the disciples. It was Jesus' handpicked leadership team, which Jesus put the hope of the world, the church, into their hands, right? So Matthew was one of the 12, and Matthew was there. Matthew tells us this, that when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, when Jesus had made the Sadducees look like fools, I think the Pharisees internally were like, yeah, you're not that good, Sadducees. But yet the Pharisees were trying to trap and trick Jesus themselves. So the Pharisees, they pulled together, and they came up with a line of questioning, again, with one goal: to trap Jesus, because they wanted to discredit Jesus. They wanted to get rid of Jesus. They wanted to take away his leadership and his influence. And so the Pharisees came to Jesus, and they asked him this question. They said, "Teacher, which is the most important commandments in the law of Moses?" What were they asking? Hierarchically, right? What's in the number 1 spot? Again, doesn't matter what's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and on down. And for the Jewish faith, the Jewish construct, they believe there are 613 some odd laws. And all they cared about, what was the most? Number 1. Again, number 1 is everything. Number 2 and below doesn't matter. So they asked Jesus the question. Here's what they knew. The Pharisees knew that Jesus was, he's a rabbi. He was a gifted teacher. Jesus was an expert of the Jewish law. And so the Pharisees knew that this first question was a setup question. It's all it was, a setup question to trap Jesus. So they had more questions, a different kind of line of thinking, because they wanted to lead Jesus down so they could trap him. So this first question was a setup. And so Jesus answered exactly how the Pharisees knew he would answer. Jesus said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. How did they know Jesus was going to answer like that? How did they know? Well, because this is part of the great Shema, which is the most important Jewish prayer to this day. To this day, most important Jewish prayer. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is actually verse 5. Verse 4 starts the Shema, and the verse 4 says this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. Now they knew when they asked Jesus the setup question that Jesus, being a God-fearing Jew, a religious expert, a rabbi, would answer with this. And Jesus said, this is the first and greatest commandment. So the Pharisees were like, yes, number one spot. Love God. Love God. They're like, okay, we got Jesus right where we want him. But in the next breath, as the Pharisees were like, yes, we got him in our trap. We just need to lead him to the second and third, and how many of our questions and thoughts they had for him. We got him where we want him. In the next breath, Jesus says, a second is equally important. And this would have shocked everyone listening to Jesus. I mean, this statement would have sucked the air out of the space, because there's nothing greater than the Shema. I mean, in the Jewish faith and the Jewish culture for some 1,500 years, number one was love God. Number one was love God. There's nothing more important. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love God was number one. And all of a sudden Jesus goes, second is equally important. What do you mean equally important? There's nothing greater than loving God. There's no equally important. There's not a secondary thought that gets attached to loving God. Jesus, what are you saying here? I mean, to say it was shocking is an understatement. People couldn't even wrap their minds around what Jesus was saying. And then Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor. And here's what's interesting about this idea of loving your neighbor. It's easy to love your neighbor when? Well, when it looks something like this. When your neighbor encourages you, forgives you, loves you in return, serves you, understands you, looks like you, has the same perspective as you, believes like you, right? Has the same, here's a big word, theology as you, and votes like you. That's important, isn't it? Behaves like you, parents like you, has the same integrity like you, has the same moral framework as you, talks like you, same work ethic as you, and here's another fun one. Has the same viewpoint on social issues. I'm not talking the easy social issues. I'm talking about the big social issues as you. Gives like you, and genuinely likes you. But what's interesting, I mean, that's the easy side of loving your neighbor. But Jesus, at the very beginning of his ministry, his public ministry, he did something so intentionally, both with his words, but more importantly, with his actions. he started to shove loving your neighbor from the easy to the extreme. And Jesus said loving your neighbor looked more like this. The loving your neighbor is about loving someone who doesn't encourage you and won't forgive you and doesn't love you and has never served you and doesn't understand you and doesn't look like you and doesn't have the same perspective as you and doesn't have the same beliefs, the same theology as you, and oh, yeah, this one's on the screen, who doesn't vote like you. Moving on. Doesn't behave like you. I just wanted that to settle. Doesn't parent like you. Doesn't have the same integrity as you. Doesn't have the same moral framework as you. Doesn't talk like you. Doesn't have the same work ethic like you. And here's another really good one. Has a completely different perspective on social issues than you. Doesn't give like you. Shoot, doesn't even like you. And what's interesting is Jesus slammed the extreme to say, no, loving your neighbor looks a lot more like this. And not just with his words, but he lived it out. And Jesus, time and time again, if you want your faith to grow, if you truly want to live a life that reflects Jesus' heart, this is what you need to do. Go through a Bible study where you go through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The Gospels meaning the good news, the story of Jesus. Go through all four because all four have a different perspective on the life of Jesus. I mean, it's so fascinating to read all four of them. But go through all four of them, just ask yourself this question. Get a notebook, a piece of paper, write this on top of the piece of paper and say, how did Jesus teach on and live out loving your neighbor? Jesus broke religious and cultural paradigms and frameworks all the time. You see, what Jesus said was, loving God and equally to love everyone. Now, this is important. You got to hold on to this. We can read these words and quickly in our mind start to develop a hierarchy. Start to think to yourself, okay, love God is 1A and love everyone else is 1B. And in this season of life, I'm just going to focus on loving God, and then eventually I'll get to loving everyone. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus didn't say it was 1A and then 1B. Jesus didn't say that loving God was linked to or tethered to or associated to loving everyone. No, Jesus said that it's all about loving God, loving everyone. That's one, equal, the same. And here's a power in what Jesus said, was that as you understand how to love God, you start to understand how to love everyone. And as you start to love everyone, you really start to understand what it means to love God. As you start loving everyone, like Jesus defined neighbor as, the more you love unlovable people in your life, the more your love for God will grow. And the more you understand God's love for everyone, the more capacity you have to love everyone, especially the people that are difficult to love. That loving God and loving everyone is the same action. You can't separate the two. Jesus said, love God, equally important, the same action. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus said, the entire law, all the law, and all the demands of the prophets are based, and the better literal translation here says hangs on the other two commandments. All of them hangs on. And Jesus, hours before he was crucified. I mean, it was after he had already solved the argument between James and John in the seat of honor. He gathered his 12, his closest friends, his leadership team, the disciples together for one last meal. he had taken off his robe and poured the basin of water and scrubbed 24 feet. 2 being of his betrayer. 2 being of the person who was going to deny him multiple times. The other 20 were 10 men that within hours was going to run and hide in fear and leave their faith in Jesus until they saw him alive. And after he had scrubbed 24 feet, it was like Jesus was like, hey guys, if you forget everything I've ever taught you, I'm going to say something you can't forget. And if you lose track of everything you've experienced me do, I'm going to say something to you have to hold on to. And when you run away and you hide and you deny and you lie and you're scared and you think that all of this was a joke, I want you to hold on to something. It was his last thought as he's looking at his team. Because right after that, he goes to the garden and he gets arrested, he's crucified. And Jesus looks at him and says, I'm giving you a new command. Love each other. And I think when Jesus said this next line out loud, he's thinking to himself, hey guys, you have no idea the depth of my love, not just for you, for everyone. He goes, just as I have loved you, just as I have scrubbed your feet. And in his mind, he's thinking, and hours from now, I'm going to be crucified for you. You should love each other. Everything hangs on love. Everything. And remember, it's not love God 1A and love people 1B. It's one. And the more you love people in your life that are unlovable, the more your understanding of God's love grows within you. And the more you understand God's love within you, the more you'll love people that aren't anything like you. So the question that you have to answer is this: how will love direct my path? How will love, not the feeling, not the emotion. We're talking about love, the verb. How will love direct your life? How will love direct your marriage? How will love direct your parenting? How will love direct how you work? How will love direct your decision making? How will love direct? How will love? The Apostle Paul, who was a Pharisee, and that Jesus intersected with his life and completely changed his life, He was writing to a church in the city of Galatia, and he just brings this all down in such a simple thought. He said, use your freedom to serve one another in love. Because here's the thing, they all got that love was not a feeling, was not an emotion. It was a choice, and it was an action. And Paul just goes, use your freedom. Serve one another in love. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command, to love your neighbor as yourself, because Paul understood the powerful truth. The more you love your neighbor in action, the more your love for God will grow. The more you love the unlovable people in your life, the more you'll grasp the love that drove God's Son to die on the cross for everyone. So, I'm going to share with you 4 what I call pillars. 4 pillars in which we all should just put love into action in our everyday life. Now, before we get into these 4 pillars, there's 2 things I want to highlight. One is this. For some of you, I mean, your life is maxed right now, and you're going to think that, I was like, I don't have time to do all of this, right? You're going to think that. Here's the thing. I'm not saying that every one of these pillars needs to be daily in your life. What I'm going to challenge you with is, though, over your year, all 4 of these pillars of love, which is serving one another, should be lived out in your life, right? I mean, one will be daily, and one might be yearly. But throughout the course of a year, these pillars should be present in your life. They just should be. Second thing I want to challenge all of you with is this. This is a great opportunity for you to take out your phone, take pictures of the screen. If you're online right now, you can do a screenshot of your screen. Like, start taking notes. Take out your phone and start typing down notes. Maybe you grab a pad and a pencil or a note card or a prayer card, whatever it is. But I want to challenge all of you, because here's what's going to happen. I'm going to share some thoughts, and you're going to have like these whisperings. It's the Holy Spirit just speaking within you. You're going to have these thoughts. And here, if you don't take notes, here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave, and you're like, wow, that was good. I was so inspired. And then your stomach's going to growl, and you're going to go eat, and you're going to forget everything. And now, that's just, hear this. Like, for me, that just that saddens me, because I'm not here to speak. I'm here to move people into action. So, capture the thoughts, and then when your stomach growls, go eat. And then later in the day, pull out your notes and like, oh, wow, that was a good thought. Or what was I thinking there? And then start praying and say, God, out of all these things that stirred within my spirit, what do I need to move into action? But if you don't capture them, I'm just telling you, it's a colossal waste of time. So capture those thoughts however you want to do. Capture those thoughts. And later on today, later on tomorrow, say, okay, God, maybe not put them all into action, but I'm going to start. I'm going to start. So the first pillar is this. It's your circle. It's your immediate family, friends, your life group. How are you loving the people in your immediate circle? Now, I can spend a lot of time on all 3 of these. I'm just going to spend time on one. But you can apply some of these thoughts across the board. I just want to spend the time on family. So if you are married, I'm specifically talking to you. If you're engaged to be married, talking to you. If you're dating someone, you think one day you might get married, I'm talking to you. Or if you're just dreaming about being married one day, I'm talking to you, okay? If you're in one of those categories, your husband, your wife, other than your relationship with God, your husband, your wife, hierarchically, is in the number 1 spot. If you're married and you have kids, parents, listen to this. If you're married and you have kids, your kids are number 2. Not number 1. It's the biblical framework that God gave us. Husbands, you're called to love and serve and honor your wife like Jesus loves and serves and honors the church. The number 1 spot in marriage goes to each other. And here's what happens, parents. Here's what happens. You have kids, and all of a sudden, intentionally or unintentionally, you shove your kids into the number 1 spot, and as all of your focus goes on your kids, one day, both of you wake up, and you will say, or you'll think something like this, well, we just fell out of love. You don't fall out of love. You don't fall out of love. You intentionally walk away from a person. And when you put your kids in that number 1 spot, you are making an intentional decision not to love first your spouse. And what God has called us as husbands and wives to do is love our spouse, number 1. This week with our staff, I sat them all down. It was our staff meeting. I looked at all of our staff, and we have incredible Jesus-loving leaders here at Tri-County Church. And I looked at all of them, and I said the same thing. If you are married or getting on the path to be married, every week, you should be on a date with your spouse Period. And right now, some of you, I know you're sitting there right now thinking to yourself, every week a day with my spouse, we don't have time. I work 900 hours and we have 85 kids and our cats are exponentially reproducing. You don't have time not to. Hear this. You don't have time not to date your spouse. Period. Maybe you need to look at your kids and say, one less sports activity, one less school activity. You don't have time not to. My wife and I, we protect our Friday date days, and sometimes it's as simple. We drop our kids off to school when school's in session, and we just go to garage sales together. And you know what's the genius about garage sales? It's free to browse. And if we go wild, we might spend a quarter for a golf ball, right? Like this is not a money or time issue. This is a priority issue. And God says, if you're married, love first your husband. Love first your wife. And here's the thing, parents. Your kids, as they see you love each other, that's the greatest gift you can give them, is for them to watch you love each other. Remember, love isn't a feeling or emotion. It is an action and it is a choice. The decision is you got to answer this question. How will love direct my path? Second one, it's your community. It's your community. Things in your community are, well, it's your neighbors, your work, your school functions, organizations. Things in your local community, whatever local community you're tethered to, right? How are you loving? How are you serving your local community? I mean, do you know your neighbors? Do you know the people on the cul-de-sac? Do you know the people on the left and right of you? For some of you, it's, do you know the person who lives up and over the mountain from you, right? But do you know your neighbors? At work, are you loving first at work? I mean, you spend a whole lot of time with people. Some people you like, some of those people you don't like. But are you loving first? For myself, over a year ago, I joined in Du Bois, the United Way board. And why? Because I wanted to serve the community I live in. I live in Du Bois. I wanted to serve my community. This last year, I had an opportunity to coach U19 girls soccer. And again, it was another opportunity for me. It filled two of these pillars for me to serve the community, but also we did it as a family. All of us all in together. It was awesome. So this was part of my circle, right? That we as a family got to spend time together and got to serve the community, right? It's genius when you can start applying these pillars together. It's amazing. But I did this. Why? Because I wanted to be an active part in the community in which not Pastor Chris, Jesus follower, lives in. Right? How are you serving your community? It's why 6 months ago, it amazes me. It's only been 6 months. 6 months we launched Square One Community. Square One is all about us helping, us as Jesus followers, helping meet the real needs in all of our local communities. And over the last 6 months, it's been incredible to see already the impact is having in local communities. We launched what's called I Am, and I Am is all about self-confidence and significance. I was raised in a family where my mom and dad poured self-confidence and significance into me, but many of your stories, that wasn't the case. And so I Am is all about helping equip people because we want to help people go from surviving to thriving. So it's helping pour into people saying, you are someone significant. We launched a resume interview building course where we're coaching people how to develop a resume and how to interview. And we're finding local business leaders that want to pour into their community and help people in that skill set. We're launching right now because this is one of the fastest growing needs in our local communities, and maybe this is your story. We're launching what's called Step In, and Step In is all about grandparents that are now parenting full-time their grandkids. And we're just helping equip grandparents to now parent their grandkids. And the list goes on and on and on, what God is doing through Square One. Both in our local communities here in Pennsylvania, but we have Square One now going in Las Vegas. We're partnering, Square One's partnering with many different churches, which is actually bringing churches together, which is amazing. We're partnering with other business owners because they want to help their employees. And the list goes on and on and on. The question is this. You got to answer. How will love direct your path? Are you loving first in your local community? The third one is causes. And this is a question. And again, God might stir in this moment. God might stir later today. But here's the question that I want you to wrestle with. What is stirring within my soul? What is that stirring that you start thinking about going, there's something that I see a need. And God wants me to move into action, to love first in that area. What is that? You know, I think about Square One. And you know what God did? God started stirring within me, and God was stirring within Michael Clement, who's now our executive director. God was stirring within him. God was stirring within a local business leader. Her name's Pam, and stirring within Pam's heart. And all of a sudden, God started bringing us together to realize that the stirring within our individual souls were connected together. And out of the stirring of just people who said, hey, there's a need. We got to do something about it. Guess what? Square One has come to fruition. I'm just telling you, when you recognize the stirring within your soul and you move into action. It's why we have Square One in Las Vegas. A guy named Mitch stirring within his soul. And it is changing Vegas from the inside out. I tell you, when you listen and follow that stirring, it changes lives, communities from the inside out. Scott Anderson, who runs he's our online campus pastor. He has an organization he started called Projecting Hope. Maybe you've been to a Projecting Hope film festival. Projecting Hope is all about bringing faith-based, valued films into local communities. Again, to bring communities together, people together. And about a year ago, he added another kind of a significant layer to Projecting Hope, and he calls it the X campaign. And the X campaign is all about encouraging people to move into action, to, have a cause, to put their X on that cause and do something about it. It's all about loving first. So the question you got to answer is this. How will love direct my path? The fourth pillar. It's church. It's church. I mean, the church is the hope of the world. It's what Jesus gave his life for. A gathering of people to tell everyone about him. Serve in your church. Now, again, we just like to make things simple around here. We just do. So I'm pretty sure, but you're going to help me. You're going to help me verify with real-time data that I'm right on this thought. Okay? Are you ready to help verify for me that I'm right? I know that sounds so self-serving, but you're going to help me do this. Okay? On the count of three, across all of our locations, those of you watching online, I can see you online. I can see you online. Not really. That would be weird, but think that I can, okay? All of you, on count of three, I'm going to ask you to do something. Again, you're just going to help verify that you can actually do this because I think 100% of you can do this. You ready? You ready? Count of three. This is what I'm going to ask you all to do. Count of three. I'm going to ask you to smile. 1, 2, 3, go. Come on, I can see some of you like you smile. Yeah. Look at that. It's amazing. It's amazing. I was pretty sure God created all people to smile. And guess what? You just proved me right that God didn't mess up when he created you. He was like, I forgot to put the smile gene in you. We all can smile, right? And here's the thing. Serving in the church can be as simple as smiling. I hear all the time how friendly Tri-County Church is. And I tell you, it's probably one of the top compliments I hear all the time. People walk into one of our locations and just talk about, man, people there are so friendly. So I want to invite you, encourage you, start serving your church. And there's some areas you can serve in. Administration and finance. Some of you are just wired that way. We want you to help serve. Our cafe team, and maybe you're like, I can't make coffee. That's okay. Can you smile? Yes. Guest services, again. You're like, Chris, I really don't have a skill set. I can't sing on stage. I can't play an instrument. But you can smile. Remember, it's the most important gift that can be exercised within all of our campuses is people smiling. You can stand at a door and smile and greet people. Kids Rock, can you smile? I tell you, just serve in Kids Rock, and kids will make you smile. I mean, right? I mean, they just have that loving energy to them. Building and maintenance, production, velocity, our teenagers. Pour yourself into them. Help encourage them to be the leaders that they are. Be a life group leader. And we've made this so simple for all of you. Again, you got your phones? You can text in church. This is great. Like, you can text in church. Some of you were like, I thought it was illegal to text in church. No, it's not. So we made it super simple. Text 555-888. 555-888. See, all of you are going to be saying that the rest of the day. That was my goal. And just text TCC Serve. One word. The caps don't matter. We'll send you a link. Click on that link. It'll take you maybe 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. Fill out the simple form. We'll connect with you. We'll help you get serving. That's simple. That's simple. 4 pillars. 4 pillars. It's all of them. Your circle, your community, the cause that God is stirring within your soul and your church. The question you got to answer is this: how will love direct your path? How will love direct your path? Love first. It's not a feeling. It's not an emotion. It's a choice. It's an action.